They said I was wasting my life, that no one really makes it with a paintbrush, that starving artists are just dreamers too stubborn to wake up. They told everyone I gave up, that I disappeared into my little apartment with nothing but cheap acrylics and unpaid bills. They said I was delusional. They said I was lonely. They said I was lost. And for a while, they were right. There were nights when the silence became a soundtrack. Nights when the canvas stared back at me like it knew how afraid I was. Nights when I ran my fingers over the same brushstroke 100 times just to feel something. They rewrote my story before I had a chance to live it. They turned it into a warning. A whisper passed down at family dinners. She was talented once. Shame, she never did anything with it. But what they called a failure was something bigger, just not visible yet. It was becoming. It wasn't success. It wasn't a spotlight. It wasn't applause. It was silence, stillness, waiting, like the ocean right before the wave. I remember the moment it all changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, like a breath you didn't know you were holding until it left you. A man in a wool coat stood alone in front of my painting. He didn't know I was watching. He didn't know the woman who had made that canvas bleed with color was standing behind the gallery curtain, trying to stop her hands from shaking. He just stood there, still, eyes glassy. He whispered something to himself I couldn't hear. And then he turned to the curator and nodded. And that was it. A nod that changed everything. A nod worth $40,000. But we'll get there. Not yet. You have to understand what came before. Because before that nod, before the gallery walls, before the wine glasses and handshakes, there was just me and the dark. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. But for a long time, I lived in the shadow of what they expected me to become. And this is the story of what happened when I refused to stay in that shadow. I was supposed to be a lawyer, or at least that's what they always said. Claire has a sharp mind. She's always been articulate. She'll go far, just wait and see. The path was laid out like a smooth concrete sidewalk. No detours, no cracks. Just one straight line from high school valedictorian to pre-law at Stanford to courtroom victories in polished heels. That's what success looked like in our family. You didn't color outside the lines. You stayed safe. You made six figures. You went to brunch on Sundays and talked about office politics over mimosas. That was the plan. And for a while I followed it. I got into UCLA with a scholarship. Majored in political science. Interned at a firm where everyone wore smiles like armor. But the deeper I went into that world, the quieter I became. Not in volume, but in presence. It was like watching someone else move through my life. Like reading a script someone else had written. Every day felt like wearing a suit 2 sizes too small. Tight. Unforgiving. Foreign. I remember sitting in a law prep seminar once, surrounded by students clicking away on laptops and thinking, if I died right now, would anything in this room stop moving? It scared me, that thought. That it didn't feel dramatic, it felt true. I started skipping classes. At first, it was just once a week. Then more. I'd take my sketchbook to the beach and sit for hours, watching the tide sketch and erase itself on the sand. I wasn't painting then. Not seriously. Just doodling. Faces in the margins. Hands reaching for something. One afternoon, I drew a woman crumbling into birds. I don't know why. I didn't think much of it. Until I showed it to my roommate, Kat. She stared at it for a long time, then looked at me and said, Claire, do you know how good this is? I laughed. Shrugged. Said, it's nothing. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at that drawing for hours. It felt more honest than anything I'd said aloud in months. A week later, I dropped out. There was no big announcement. No cinematic exit. Just a quiet withdrawal form and an inbox full of passive-aggressive emails from professors. When I told my parents, the silence on the phone was thick. My dad cleared his throat and said, so, what now? I didn't have an answer. My mom said, well, we don't talk about that anymore. They told everyone I was taking a break. that I needed to reset. But I knew what they meant. They meant I failed. They meant we don't mention the artist child. They meant she was promising once. At family gatherings, people stopped asking me questions, stopped looking me in the eye. I was the story that didn't fit the narrative. I got a job at a diner, started painting at night, landscapes at first, then faces, then dreams. No one noticed. No one asked what I was doing. No one cared. And part of me liked it that way. Obscurity felt safer than pretending. I was anonymous, invisible, but for the first time in years, I felt real. I had no applause, no titles, no LinkedIn updates, just a room full of canvases and the sound of my own breathing. And that's where I began again. Rock bottom wasn't a moment. It was a stretch of time. A long, slow hum of days that blurred together like smeared paint. But somewhere in that quiet, something began. It started on a Tuesday. I was walking home from the night shift at the diner, my shoes damp from the Portland drizzle. There was an old community board outside a grocery store, faded flyers, thumbtacks rusted from rain. One caught my eye. It was handwritten. Art instructor needed, volunteer, senior living center. I almost laughed. I wasn't even sure I counted as an artist yet. But something about the way it was written like a whisper instead of a shout. I tore off the number. 2 days later, I walked into Pine Grove Senior Living with a paint-stained hoodie and a knot in my stomach. The woman at the desk, Marianne, smiled when I said I was here about the flyer. She said, "Oh, good. They've been asking when someone creative would show up." They put me in a small rec room with fluorescent lights and a cracked window. There were 6 residents sitting around a plastic table, already poking at watercolor sets. No one looked up. I introduced myself. One of them, Mrs. Alden, looked at me over her glasses and said, "You're the artist?" I nodded, unsure. She blinked once. She said, and went back to her page. I started simple. Shapes. Shading. Warm colors versus cool. It wasn't glamorous. No one clapped. But something about those sessions started shifting things inside me. There was one afternoon about 3 weeks in when I was helping a resident named Evelyn. She was 84. Sharp as a tack. Had the driest wit I'd ever met. She sat hunched over her paper, trying to draw a blue jay from a magazine photo. "This machine hates me," she muttered, flicking at her shaky hand. I sat beside her, holding her wrist steady as she painted. "You're doing great," I said. She sighed. "You know," she said, "my son lives in Boston. Never calls. But I showed him one of these paintings you helped me make, and he sent me a frame in the mail. Said he hung it in his living room." Her eyes softened, but didn't meet mine. "You brought my baby into my living room," she whispered. And I just sat there still, letting the moment pass through me like wind through curtains. It didn't make headlines. No viral posts. No interviews. But it mattered. Every Tuesday and Friday I came back. Sometimes we painted birds. Sometimes we just talked. I started looking forward to those afternoons more than anything else. And something unexpected happened. The paintings I made at home changed. They felt warmer, less tortured, less desperate to prove something. I wasn't painting for validation anymore. I was painting because I needed to, because something was flowing through me again. And when I wasn't at Pine Grove, I was creating. I started uploading tiny digital scans of my paintings to an anonymous art portfolio online. No name, no bio, just color and shape. No one was watching, which made it perfect. It was like planting seeds in the dark. It started slowly. A message on the art portfolio site. "Hi, do you sell prints?" I stared at the screen for 10 minutes. I'd never considered it. I didn't even know how. But I replied, I could. They ordered 3. The next week, another message. Then another. I began setting up a tiny online shop using a print-on-demand service. No big plans. No logos. Just quiet offerings in the night. I made $100 that month. Then $250. Then $500. I was stunned. I reinvested it into better materials. Better scanning equipment. More canvas. I painted every night after Pine Grove. Late into the dark, the soft scratching of brushes became a kind of lullaby. People began leaving reviews. One said, "I cried when I opened this. It reminded me of my mother." Another, "This piece sits in my office. It calms me." It wasn't fame, but it was real. People felt something. Because of me. After a year, I started getting emails from interior designers. They wanted commissions for clients. 3 pieces here. A large format there. I still lived modestly. Tiny apartment, thrifted coats. But something had shifted. By the end of the second year, I had made over $26,000 through art. It wasn't the millions people dream of. But it was mine. Every brushstroke. I built a real website. Started shipping internationally. One designer sent me photos of a hotel lobby in Toronto featuring my triptych. My art in a real building. It looked surreal. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I wasn't chasing galleries or validation. I just kept showing up. Canvas after canvas. Color after color. And somehow, quietly, the world began to notice. But not my family. That part? Still frozen in place. Every Thanksgiving, I'd sit in silence while my cousins discussed career milestones. Promotions. Startups. Engagements. I'd bring a homemade cranberry tart, something beautiful I'd crafted with love. And someone would inevitably say, "Still doing the painting thing?" Still. Like it was a phase. A delusion. A tiny hobby I couldn't let go of. One year, my uncle turned to my dad across the table and asked, "What does Claire do these days?" He chuckled. "She's always been the free spirit. You know Claire." I smiled politely, looked down at my plate, bit my tongue until it hurt. They didn't know I had built something. They didn't ask. And I didn't tell them, because part of me was still waiting for their permission to be proud. That's the thing about invisibility. You carry it even after you've stepped into the light. But I kept going. I joined a local collective of female artists. We painted together on Sundays, shared resources, pushed each other forward. One of them, Janine, said to me once, "You don't talk much about your success. You know you're doing well, right?" I shrugged. "It just doesn't feel like the kind of success they taught us to want." She smiled. "Good. That's how you know it's real." We organized our own exhibitions, coffee shop shows, open studios. And one day, a man named Daniel, a gallery curator from downtown, walked into one of those shows. He stopped in front of a painting I'd called "Gravity Isn't Always Down." It was abstract, movement, tension, surrender, painted after Evelyn passed away at Pine Grove. He stared at it for a long time, then asked to speak to the artist. Me. We talked for 20 minutes, then shook hands. He said he'd be in touch. I didn't believe him. But 2 weeks later, I got the email. He wanted to feature my work in a group exhibition. I reread it 3 times before it sank in. I'd be showing my paintings. On real white walls. Under real lights. Next to real names. And yet, when I told my mom, there was a pause. Then she said, "Well, that's nice. That's all." Not unkind, but not proud either. Just neutral. I thought it would hurt more. But it didn't. Because by then I knew the truth. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I had already found my reflection. In the eyes of strangers. Who had felt something real. Because of me. The gallery was white, polished, and smelled like varnish and dustless wood. Opening night buzzed like a beehive. Heels clicking, glasses clinking, voices dipped in self-importance. I stood in the corner of the room, invisible again, but this time, by choice. No name tag. No announcement. Just a long black coat and a trembling hand wrapped around a glass of flat champagne. They'd placed "Gravity Isn't Always Down" in the central hallway, the spot everyone passed through at least twice. I watched as people paused, tilted their heads, leaned closer. Some moved on. Some returned. Some took photos and whispered things to each other. But one moment, one voice, changed everything. A woman in a gray wool coat stood in front of my painting for what must have been 10 minutes. She wasn't young. maybe in her mid-40s. Soft curls, sharp posture, eyes fixed on the movement in the canvas like she was trying to remember something. She didn't know I was standing 10 feet away. Then a man, her fiancé, I think, walked up and asked if she was ready to leave. I'll never forget what she said. She turned to him and said, "Do you remember when we moved your mom into Pine Grove? She hated it. We thought it would break her." He nodded, slowly. She pointed at the painting. She started painting there. Every week, some young woman came and made her feel alive again. "Do you remember that blue painting she gave us before she passed?" He blinked. "Yeah," she said. "This is her. I'd bet anything this is the same artist." My heart slammed in my chest. She was talking about me. About Evelyn. About the sessions no one had cared about, the Tuesday afternoons that never made it into family group chats. The woman stepped closer to the canvas. She didn't say much after that. Just stood there breathing, remembering. And then, she asked someone nearby, "Who's the artist behind this one?" The gallery assistant checked the small placard beside the frame. He said, "Claire Whitman." She gasped. "Claire. That's her. That's her name. I remember Evelyn mentioning it." Then she looked around the room. I thought about disappearing. About slipping out the side door, letting her leave with the mystery still intact. But something kept me rooted. She found me eventually. Walked over slowly, almost reverently. "Are you Claire?" I nodded. She didn't ask for proof. She just said, "You changed my mother-in-law's last months. You gave her something we couldn't." I didn't know what to say. So I just looked her in the eyes and said, "She changed mine too." She smiled, glassy-eyed. Then whispered, "She said you were going to be something." I'm so glad she was right. That's when it hit me. The reversal. The full circle. Not because I demanded attention. Not because I forced them to see me. But because the truth walked in by itself and refused to stay quiet. The gallery wasn't loud after that. In fact, it got quieter inside me. Like something settled. Clicked into place. That night, I sold my first major painting for $40,000. It wasn't just the number. It was what it represented. Value. Not assigned by bloodlines or birthdays, but by resonance. By connection. By something real. Later, when the gallery director shook my hand and said, "We'll be talking a lot more, Claire," I smiled, steady this time. Because now, they weren't guessing who I was. They knew. The check cleared 3 days after the show. I stared at the bank app, blinking at the number. It didn't feel real. I didn't rush out to celebrate. Didn't post about it. Didn't buy anything new. I just sat with it, quietly, in the same studio where I used to doubt everything I touched. A few weeks later, a padded envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my mom's familiar handwriting. Inside was a single photograph, one I hadn't seen in years. It was me, maybe 8 years old, standing in front of a watercolor sunset I'd painted in school. I was holding it like it was sacred, grinning wide, missing 2 front teeth. On the back of the photo, my mother had written just 3 words. "You always were." No apology. No explanation. But I didn't need one. It wasn't pride. It was peace. A week after that, my brother called me. Out of nowhere. He asked if I'd be willing to help him find an artist to create something for his office lobby. I laughed. "I could recommend someone," I said. He paused. Then added, "I meant you." I didn't say yes right away. I let the silence sit for a moment. Because it wasn't about the job. It was about him acknowledging that what I do is real. We hung up after 20 minutes, lighter than we started. Not because everything was perfect, but because the gaps between us had softened. No grand gestures, just small openings. And that's how the healing came. Not in fireworks. Not in declarations. In whispers. In gestures. In space made and offered back. I still painted at night. Still drank cheap tea from chipped mugs. Still listened to Nina Simone while layering blues over burnt sienna. But now I moved with ease. I didn't chase. I didn't beg to be seen. I just created. Because what I'd built was never about revenge. It was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about finding my way back to the part of me that never needed permission. That little girl in the photo. The one holding her paper sunset like it could light the whole world. She never doubted herself. She just needed time. And silence. To come home again. If you've ever felt invisible, like the room gets quiet when you enter, like your dreams sound ridiculous when spoken aloud, this story was for you. If they laughed when you spoke your truth, if they rolled their eyes when you dared to try, if your silence became survival, and your smile became armor, I see you, because I was you. For years, I painted in shadows, not just because I lacked a studio, but because I thought if no one saw, it wouldn't hurt when they didn't care. But the truth, what you create in the dark, still carries light. It still matters. Even if it whispers instead of roars. Even if only one heart is changed by it. Even if that heart is your own. I don't know where you're watching this from. A small apartment, a crowded bus, a break room where no one knows your name. But I want to ask you something. What have you given up on? Just because it didn't look like success to them? What passion did you bury? Under practicality? Under pressure? Under silence? And more importantly, is it still glowing somewhere under the ashes? Because maybe, just maybe, you were never meant to follow their path. Maybe you were born to make your own. One quiet step at a time. I'm not here to give you a fairy tale. This isn't about overnight fame or viral wins. This is about slow, sacred becoming. About finding your worth. When no one claps. When no one's watching. About trusting that your voice, your hands, your vision, all have a place in this world, even if it's not on anyone's radar yet. I'll leave you with this. Keep going. Keep creating. Keep becoming. Because someone out there will one day be changed by the thing you almost gave up on. And when that moment comes, you'll understand what I mean. When I say, it's not about being seen. It's about seeing yourself and not looking away. Where are you watching from? Tell me your story. Someone, maybe me, needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for not giving up on becoming who you already are. More stories are coming. Real ones. Quiet victories. Messy starts. Unexpected endings. Because your truth deserves space. And I promise, this is just the beginning.